Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is Troy, your host. We are live and recording.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our Tuesday, September 26, 2023 business meeting. I will call it to order and ask that you rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you for that. Attorney Garcia, do we have certification of the agenda today?
Yes, you do, sir. The County Attorney's Office reviewed all items on the agenda, and the appropriate notice and jurisdiction is in place.
Great. And do any commissioners have disclosures for items on this agenda today?
I have none. Thank you.
No, sir.
And I have none either. I was intending to do an invocation, but we don't have a pastor in the room today. But I would ask you to just join me in a brief moment of silence, if you would. Okay, thank you very much. So with that, we'll move on to our ceremonies and proclamations today. And our ceremony today is a resolution proclaiming September as Workforce Development Month. And we have Classic Wagner, Principal Planner, presenting for staff. Hi, Classic.
Reading a resolution proclaiming the Workforce Development Month during September of 2023. I'd like to mention that we are joined today by 80 Works staff. They're in attendance. Reading the resolution, whereas the National Association of Workforce Development Professionals, NAWDP, has announced September as Workforce Development Month in an ongoing tradition to bring attention to the services provided to our workforce through workforce development centers. And whereas the county's locally driven workforce ecosystem is business-led, aligned with educators, employers, and economic developers to encourage regional workforce development and ensure we are building the labor force that businesses need to make our region thrive. And whereas acknowledging that how and where we work is changing, Arapahoe-Douglas County Works offers advancements in technology learning resources and workshops at workforce centers in the region and partners with the Colorado Apprenticeship Hub in order to offer additional resources to businesses and job seekers. And whereas skills-based hiring bridges the gap between skills employers need and those they can find within the workforce, and Workforce Development Month is an opportunity to recognize that challenge and to work collaboratively to address it. And whereas the Arapahoe-Douglas County Works as a regional operation has partnered with 1,800 businesses and over 14,000 individuals to provide these and more workforce development services from 2022 to 2023. And whereas the last 2 years have seen the highest use of the Arapahoe-Douglas Works Workforce Center with access to in-demand and growing career pathways for finding and recruiting skilled workers. And whereas due to the contributions of the Arapahoe-Douglas County Works as a regional workforce development center since May 2021, Douglas County has seen the lowest percentage of unemployment in the state. And now, therefore, be it resolved that the Board of County Commissioners for the County of Douglas, State of Colorado, hereby proclaim that September 2023 shall be commemorated as Workforce Development Month. Passed and adopted this 26th day of September 2023 in Douglas County, Colorado.
Great, Classic. Thank you so much for that. Any questions or comments for staff?
Thank you for reading that.
Thank you, Classic. And any citizen comment on this item today? Is there any citizen comment? Okay, I'll bring it back to the board for any further discussion and or emotion.
Well, this is great. I mean, workforce development is something that we've really been focused on as a board, at least in my time on the board. And, have you guys had an opportunity to work with Classic since you joined the staff? I've had her on a couple of our local business, the Castle Rock Downtown Merchants Association. I'll learn how to talk sometime during this meeting, I promise. But so, hey, Classic, it's great to have you. Hope to see you before us many more times and in many more meetings providing that staff support to the board. But if it pleases the board, I do have a motion to approve a resolution proclaiming September as Workforce Development Month.
Second.
So we have a first and second on the floor. Any further discussion? I'll just add that I am pleased and honored to sit on the board of 80 Works and really want to highlight and thank the work of the professionals at that organization for everything that they do. We know it is so critically important, and that statistic that we are, did you say the county with the lowest unemployment in the state? I just want to make sure I got that right. That's a pretty exciting thing. Did I get that right?
Yes.
I did. Okay, just wanted to make sure. Well, that is super exciting. And, when we think about it, I'm always trying to connect the dots on the board. I think I've been on the board of 80 Works for about 5 years. And it's ensuring that not only is the good work supported, but that on the ground, your neighbors across the street, if you ask them what 80 Works is, they would be able to tell you. If you ask your local businesses, what is 80 Works, they would say, oh, I know when I use them. Because I think that's critically important, not only to support this amazing organization, but to make sure that on the ground in the business community, those that are seeking jobs actually know what 80 Works is and are connecting to those reskill, upskill, great opportunities to train and get jobs in our community. So thank you again for that incredible work. I will be in support. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, and that motion passes. Thanks again for being with us. So with that, we'll move on to item 2 for today, which is our consent agenda. And I will ask for let me first ask if there's any comment, either in person or online, with regard to any item on our consent agenda. Any citizen comment? Troy?
Thank you, Commissioner. I have no online comment.
Okay, thank you. And with that, I'll close citizen comment on the consent agenda and bring it back to the board for any further discussion and or a motion.
I have a motion to approve the request in all items A through AD of the consent agenda. Item P has been pulled from the agenda.
I'll second.
So we have a first and second on the floor. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, and that motion carries. And with that, we will move on to item 3 today, which is our regular agenda items. The first is item 3A, which is a Community Services Block Grant 2024-2026 Application and Community Action Plan. Stephen Dodrell, Community Programs Coordinator, presenting for staff. Hi, Stephen.
Hello, thanks for having me. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Stephen Dodrell, representing the Department of Community Development. Before you today is a request to authorize the Community Services Block Grant 2024-2026 application and plan as recommended by the CSBG Tripartite Board. CSBG funds are federal funds allocated to the State Department of Local Affairs. Funds are distributed by formula to counties and councils of government. Douglas County is expected to receive just over $120,000 for the 2024 program year. Funds are intended to help alleviate the causes and conditions of poverty locally, serving residents at or below 125% of the federal poverty level. For the county to receive CSBG funds, an application must be submitted every 3 years. As part of this application, a community needs assessment must be conducted to identify needs specific to our community. This local assessment must include feedback from low-income residents and stakeholders who serve the intended population. The results of the gathered data informs the content of our community action plan, which lays out a blueprint for the CSBG funds for the next 3 years. Federal standards require that the county follow the results-oriented management and accountability framework. Staff completed the community needs assessment and developed a plan in accordance with the state and federal policies. The outreach process to complete the plan included a survey completed by 136 low-income residents and 38 community partners. The resulting information helped to identify the top community needs. Survey data was presented to a group of 47 community stakeholders who engaged in conversations around the top 7 identified areas of need. Following the stakeholders meeting, the highest ranking opportunities were presented to a gathering of low-income individuals. These residents were asked to provide feedback on the ideas generated and add their own input from their lived experience. As a result of the information gathered through this outreach process, the following areas have been identified as the highest rated needs: affordable housing, food assistance, personal financial health, employment, utility assistance, case management, and well-being. To address the identified needs, the plan recommends supporting DC Cares, or Douglas County Cares, the Community of Care Network, and the Douglas County Homeless Initiative. Services provided through these three identified groups include transitional housing, case management, transportation assistance payments, funding to support the training and coordination of services, homeless navigation and administration, and staff support of community initiatives. On August 25th, 2023, the CSBG Tripartite Advisory Board approved the Community Needs Assessment and reviewed the CSBG 2024 through 2026 application and plan. The plan was unanimously recommended to the Board of County Commissioners for authorization. Staff recommends authorization of the 2024 through 2026 CSBG application and plan by the Board of County Commissioners. This concludes my presentation. Joining us today in the room is Aaron White, Executive Director of Manna Resource Center and Chair of the CSBG Tripartite Board, and staff is prepared to answer any questions that the board may have.
Great, Stephen. Thank you so much. Any questions for staff?
I have none. Thank you.
No questions.
I don't have any questions, but maybe a comment or two. Just a tremendous debt of thanks to all of you. Certainly appreciate Rand's great leadership and certainly all that Aaron does on this board as well. Stephen, you've been great at facilitating and providing the information needed on all of this. So it's an honor. I sit on this board as well. I've seen all the recommendations and certainly appreciate the ones that are being presented to staff today, or to the board today. Is there any further discussion? Let me open it up for any citizen comment. Is there any citizen comment in the room or online with regard to this item?
Commissioner, I have no online comment.
Okay, and with that, I'll close citizen comment, bring it back to the board for any further discussion and or motion.
Chair, you deserve a lot of credit on this one because I couldn't help but notice in the packet there is a name of the senior elected official that's on that application, and that name happens to be yours. I know that these are topics that are near and dear to your heart. I know you put a lot of work in with staff in order to make sure that we're able to acquire these funds from the state and then put them to good use as the people of Douglas County would want. So it really is, well, if it pleases the board, I do have a motion to approve a Community Services Block Grant 2024 through 2026 application and community action plan.
Second.
So we have a first and second on the floor. Any further discussion? I would just say thank you for that, Commissioner Teal, but refuse to accept any credit. It's really the hard work of staff and our team that have made this these funds possible, so appreciate that. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, and that motion carries. Great. So with that, we'll move on to item 3B, which is an agreement regarding Castle Pines Urban Renewal Authority tax increment financing. Dan Avery presenting for staff. Dan?
Thank you, Commissioners. Dan Avery for staff. In May of 2023, the City of Castle Pines formed an Urban Renewal Authority. And in early June, the city provided written notice to the county of its intent to adopt an urban renewal plan and enter into a financing agreement with the county regarding collection of incremental property tax revenue that is generated by new development within the newly defined Castle Pines West Commercial District Urban Renewal Plan area. On August 7th, representatives from the city presented concepts of this financing plan to the board, and on September 5th, staff and the board discussed the fiscal impacts of the URA plan under the modeled scenarios provided by the city. Staff and the board discussed potential fiscal impacts to County Human Services and the Sheriff's Office. Staff was directed to coordinate with the Sheriff's Office regarding its contract for law enforcement services with the City of Castle Pines. After review, the Sheriff's Office had no objection to the tax increment financing agreement as proposed. The Sheriff will continue to negotiate annually with the City of Castle Pines for the provision of law enforcement in the city. Here is a map of the urban renewal plan area. Tax authorities in this area have some ability to negotiate to retain a portion of the new property tax increment that is generated based on a 2015 law. The key provision in this agreement is the levy allocation. As you can see here, this agreement would allow the Castle Pines Urban Renewal Authority to retain 100% of the increment that is generated from new development in this area. Under the URA, Douglas County would continue to receive sales tax generated in the URA, both from existing businesses and from new businesses, as well as property tax, the current property tax that Douglas County receives, and any additional use tax that's generated by the development. So all told, Douglas County will continue to receive $1.75 to $2 million annually over the life of the URA. The additional increment generated from new development in the URA would go to that entity. This concludes my presentation. Based on feedback received from the Sheriff's Office and previous discussions with the board, staff recommends approval of the financing agreement as proposed. And as we've discussed in the past, we do anticipate that the City of Lone Tree, having formed an urban renewal area, will present a similar request to the Board of County Commissioners. And we anticipate that the City of Castle Rock may also request something similar associated with their Brickyard development in the future.
Great, Dan. Thank you for that. Any questions for staff?
I have none. Thank you.
No questions.
And I have none either. Certainly pleased to partner with Castle Pines to ensure some great economic development in that corridor. Let me open it up for any citizen comment. Is there any citizen comment in person or online with regard to this item?
I have no online comment.
Thanks, Troy. And with that, I'll close citizen comment, bring it back to the board for any further comment and or a motion.
I have a motion to approve an agreement regarding Castle Pines Urban Renewal Authority tax increment financing.
I'll go ahead and second. This is I think this is a pretty good tool for Castle Pines to consider using. If used wisely, it could help out. So happy to second.
So there's a first and second on the floor. Any further discussion? We've had several work sessions on this, and historically there was a URA in Castle Pines that the citizens chose to dissolve because they believed it was no longer considered a blighted area, and that's always difficult when we're talking about tax increment financing or URAs. But I do feel confident, having had conversations with the elected official counterparts in Castle Pines and their staff, that this is merited, warranted, and could really lead to some productive benefit for both the county and for Castle Pines. So I will be in support. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, and that motion carries. With that, we'll move on to item C, which is the Chemours property contract to exchange real property and post-closing occupancy agreement. Again, Dan Avery presenting for staff.
Thank you, Commissioners. We have three different Dans who will be providing comments on this staff item. First, I'm going to describe some of the key provisions of this land exchange, followed by additional detail from Open Space, Engineering, and the Attorney's Office on components of the exchange. Through this exchange, Douglas County will receive a combined 275 acres of either land or conservation easement in exchange for 120 acres of land that is currently owned by the county. The exchange is substantially similar to a proposal that Douglas County considered several years ago when the Chemours property was initially listed for sale. That proposal would have required an initial outlay of between $3 and $5 million in funds from the county open space sales tax fund or the general fund at that time. This exchange requires no such county financial participation for initial land acquisition. The exchange will result in the creation of a 204-acre conservation easement that Dan Dirtz, the Open Space Director, will discuss in more detail shortly. The easement preserves a prominent elk migration corridor in northwest Douglas County that has been an acquisition target for open space for many years. The 204-acre easement also has the benefit of functioning as a community separation buffer around the community of Leviers, a priority in the county's comprehensive master plan. That buffer will effectively downzone the vacant general industrial and rural residential land on this property that could have otherwise been developed as it'll be preserved as permanent open space. Through the exchange, Douglas County will also retain sufficient land to meet its operational needs in Northwest Douglas County, as you'll hear from Dan Roberts. The land involved in this request is located along Waterton Road, west of Leviers. The proposed exchange affects 356 acres owned by Comores FC that is currently under contract to be sold to SR Acquisitions, LLC. That property is outlined here in yellow. And 294 acres owned by Douglas County along Waterton Road and Moore Road, outlined in red. Not all of the land within the county-owned property is involved in the proposal. Douglas County will retain sufficient right-of-way for future widening of Waterton Road. We will also retain the Emergency Vehicle Operations Center and 35 acres west of the EVOC, adjacent to Moore Road and adjacent to Plum Valley Heights. These sites total approximately 172 acres that are not a part of this exchange. I'm now going to turn over the presentation to Dan Dirts to talk about how this property fits into the county's open space priorities.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. For the conservation easement, this conservation easement actually will do a lot for the county in general. This is an area of the county that we've identified for years as being important for the wildlife movement corridor. We look at this as a great opportunity to create a community separation buffer for Leviers. And then really just looking at the long-term cost of a conservation easement versus a county-owned property, far less long-term for the county, very minimal, quite frankly, with us monitoring a conservation easement versus owning a property and maintaining a property and then determining the use of that property. So from the county perspective, from open space perspective, the conservation easement does quite a bit for us. As Dan spoke about the sales tax, this conservation easement will require $0 from the sales tax fund that we operate under. And although we did not need to take it to COSAC for consideration, we did during a work session with them. In general, they were very optimistic about this and very enthusiastic about this opportunity. For years, the county has looked at this area as a wildlife movement corridor. This is a critical area to link important habitats together. In this case, it specifically does that. It links many of the properties that we have purchased throughout the years to one another. So this slide here kind of shows that overall movement corridor, and you could see kind of on this slide here where that connection is, where that 204 acres will be. It is a primary area that we see plenty of animals moving through. The photos here, that we do have hundreds of elk that use that corridor, and the primary reason is to move animals from the Pike National Forest out to areas such as the Highlands Ranch open space conservation area, and other areas such as the Cherokee Ranch and Castle. So in general, this is a very important piece to wildlife movement and natural resources for the county. Now I pass it on to the third Dan, D3. Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Dan Roberts, Public Works. So one of the primary goals of this exchange is to make sure that we retain land sufficient for a future Public Works operations facility that will serve the northwest part of the county. So illustrated in the photos, this is our Parker facility, what we're planning and reserving space for. On this site is a comparable facility, similar in operation. It'll be a little bit more compact in size. And it'll also have the benefit on the preferred option property to set back away from the primary roadway, so be less visible, and just listed some of the future facility components that we would want to build in time at the facility. So the operations facility site thank you. Consists of a 48.1 storage parcel. You can see that colored in blue on the diagram. I think this is not on. This parcel here, this would be for bulk storage facility, so we would not be constructing any buildings on this. And then we have 3 other sites. The preferred site, option 1, is this 25-acre site that's contiguous to the bulk storage site. This is our preferred option for structures. Option 2 is a 12.3-acre site to the west of that, and then option 3 would be this site just to the north. The reason we are looking at 3 different options is that given the state's historic function, significant due diligence with regard to how the site may be used has already occurred, but under the agreement, we are preserving the right to conduct further site-specific investigations within each of those 3 possible sites. Final selection will occur after a thorough investigation of the individual sites, beginning with option 1, which is the initially preferred location. A separate post-closing occupancy agreement affords the county time to relocate the existing improvements on our parcels and also the equipment that is currently located on the land to be exchanged. That includes the county's contracted wildfire suppression helicopter and related equipment, Public Works operations bulk materials, and other facilities that are on that site. Douglas County will participate in overall development costs to the extent that improvements constructed by SR Acquisitions benefits the county properties. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chris Pratt with the County Attorney's Office to talk about the procedural issues.
Thank you, Dan. The only non-Dan speaking to you on this subject today. Just to clarify, so there's this would be a swap of what you see. Let's see, do we have the remote? Oh, here it is. This portion of the currently owned county property in yellow here would be swapped immediately around December when the closing is made with SR Acquisitions and Chemours for this blue parcel here, the county storage, and an option to buy option 1, 2, or an option to own 1, 2, or 3 here. As Dan more or less explained, it's a cascading set of options. The preference would be for 1 as it's contiguous and larger than the other parcels, but 2 and 3 would also suffice for the needs of facilities, and should, after further investigation, should option 1 not be usable by the county, SR Acquisitions would have the opportunity to mitigate that problem, and if they are unable or unwilling to do so, then we would have the option to do 2. The same process would take place for option 2, where we would investigate the parcel, make sure that it's usable for the purposes we need it for. If for some reason it is not, we would get the option to use option parcel 3. Option parcel 3 is land that we currently own, so we would not need to do the same robust investigation on the site. That would be the same as if we were to keep the property and just build it on our own now. So that's the long and the short of the process that will take place after closing with SR Acquisitions and the Chemours folks here, if you agree to this. That's all I have. I will turn it back over to Dan, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Great. Dan?
I'm going to conclude with a brief discussion of fiscal impact. Based on the county's understanding of the value of the Chemours property, an appraisal on the county land, and estimates of the conservation easement's value, the exchange provides a fairly equivalent value to both parties, and importantly, it does so without an outlay of county funds for land or easement acquisition. Going forward, the county is likely to realize additional value through future property tax and sales tax receipts from the exchanged land as well. This concludes the staff presentation. We're happy to take any questions you might have of staff. The SR Acquisitions representatives are also available with a brief presentation for you.
Great. Thank you so much. Any question for the Dans or the non-Dan? Okay, seeing none, we'll open it up to the applicant's presentation.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Susan Beckman, and I represent Sterling Ranch Acquisitions today. My address is 8155 Piney River Avenue, Littleton, Colorado, 80123. I'm here today with Brock Smethels, who is the president of the Sterling Ranch Development Company. I'd like to thank the Douglas County Attorney, the Public Works staff, Open Space staff, and engineering staff. This agreement has taken countless hours and a lot of work and tremendous effort, and we really do appreciate your staff's professionalism and expertise on these issues. In 2003, Harold and Diane Smethels put Sterling Ranch, originally 2,200 acres, under contract, and they closed the deal in 2008. Since then, the master plan community is home to 6,500 residents and has grown to over 3,400 acres, and this land is directly west of Comores property. The Smethels had a dream to build a master plan community that was vibrant, sustainable, and safe. And after 20 years, we're very happy to have the honor of being the #1 best-selling master plan community in the metro area for the last 3 years. When the Comores property went up for sale last year, Sterling Ranch Acquisitions bid on the property, along with 7 other developers that also bid on this property. As you know, the Comores property is situated both directly contiguous to Levere's, you can see the red circle, and at the entryway of Sterling Ranch and Roxborough. It is right on the corner of Moore Road and Waterton Road. So right there. Most of this property that we have discussed today is zoned general industrial, the most intensive land use designation in the county zoning resolution. General industrial has, with special review, some heavy industrial uses, including chemical and hazardous material storage, outdoor firing range, junkyard, mining, propane distribution facility, and a public or private landfill. From the onset, the Smethels understood it was imperative to protect the Sterling Ranch community from the risk of damaging property values within Sterling Ranch and Levere's with the potential of heavy industrial development on our doorstep. They wanted to assure that any development happening on our doorstep would be aligned with the high quality of development in Sterling Ranch and preserve the beautiful open space and protect the integral elk habitat. So you see Sterling Ranch, the development, and the property, and of course the elk habitat. The Sterling Ranch PD is already 1,300 acres of open space, local parks, and regional parks, as well as a trail network that connects to Chatfield Valley through Sterling Ranch community. So right here you see Providence Village. You're all familiar with that. The Providence Regional Park that aligns with the Sterling Gulch Wildlife Corridor, goes all the way down by Plum Valley and all the way down south. And then, of course, you see just a fragment of our trail connectivity that'll be 30 miles of trails once Sterling Ranch is built out. So this, and then the red circle up there is where the Comores property is, so you can see how close it is to Sterling Ranch. This land trade agreement is a great opportunity for everyone involved. So first, let's talk about the preservation of the wildlife corridor. The preservation of over 204 acres of open preserve is the critical missing link to an elk wildlife corridor that stretches all the way from the Highlands Ranch Conservation Area, the Cherokee Ranch, and the Pike National Forest. The important migratory connection is currently zoned general industrial. The Smethels family will conserve and maintain this property in perpetuity as a wildlife corridor and open space buffer for the community of Leviers. This land will be preserved forever. And as your staff mentioned, this is a great legacy for Douglas County because someone else besides the taxpayer will fund the preservation of this critical elk habitat and open space. It's not going, the conservation is not going to come out of the open space sales tax revenue. And I think your staff really did cover very well the discussion about the Public Works satellite facility. You all know how fast the Chatfield Basin is growing, so we're really excited about that opportunity. For the remainder of the property that was owned by Douglas County, the property that was in the future owned by Douglas County wasn't going to have any economic growth or revenue opportunities. The Smethels family vision is positive, and it can bring job growth, compatible development, economic development, attainable housing, and additional tax revenue for Douglas County to provide critical services to provide tax revenue, for the critical services that counties provide. So these are just some numbers that John Burns, David Hicks, and Lambert researched. They are our project opportunity analysts, and they did some numbers. I know we'll be talking a lot more about this in the future, but I wanted just to give you a snapshot of sales taxes. 2.5 million year one, that grows into year 10, 3.9 million. We can show later on in our processes, what the opportunities are if we reimagine Chemours. And that's what we've done in Sterling Ranch, really reimagine Chemours to preserve the wildlife corridor, protect existing communities, to spur economic development, provide jobs, and to build enduring communities. On behalf of Sterling Ranch Acquisitions and the Smethels family, I would ask for your support for this land transfer agreement.
Well, Ms. Beckman, thank you so much for that presentation. And I would like to take a special note to say thank you to the Smethels family, to Brock Smethels in particular, and you for just the ongoing engagement with the county. We know that protecting open spaces and wildlife corridors is significantly important to our citizens. We saw near 90% approval of our open space sales tax measure, which will generate about $330 million over the 15-year life of that activity. So we are very thankful to have had the opportunity to talk to you about this. And I know for many years we've been having the conversation about locating public works in a place that has the capacity to serve the needs of our community. So huge thanks to you. Let me open it up for any questions from the board. Does the board have any questions of the applicant?
So, Ms. Beckman, thank you for being here with this presentation. Just before you stood up, I think I saw a slide that staff had put up. If you could just put up that last slide again to make sure that I remembered these numbers, that I don't have them confused. And then one back, that one. So Douglas County receives land valued at between $1.5 million, and Sterling Ranch receives land valued at approximately $2.5 million. So if a citizen were to ask me why the county engaged in a land swap with a developer that they ended up with $1 million more worth of value than the county did, how would you suggest we answer that?
And I'll just add a point of clarification. I'm seeing an and underline there. So it's $1 million and a conservation easement valued at 1 to 1.5. So isn't that $2.5 million?
It's a staff side, Commissioner Thomas. I would just have them respond.
You're correct on that. It's the and that matters there. It's $1 million plus the 1 to 1.5 million of the conservation easement.
That's how I read that. I don't know if that helps my colleague.
Well, it does, but that's okay. Thank you for clarifying that, because it went up there quick and I was watching it.
And Commissioner Thomas, the reason I mentioned that it was such a great legacy for the county is that the Smithles have committed to the maintenance and preservation of this conservation easement in perpetuity. So the open space sales tax and the open space program will not be maintaining this acreage either. Not only will it be funded through this land transfer, but the Sterling Ranch Acquisitions and the Smithville family will maintain that area.
Okay, thank you. Are there tax incentives with the conservation easement, do you know?
There will be no, Commissioner Thomas, there will be no tax incentive the way that this is currently written for the Sterling Ranch acquisition. This is really a gift from the Smithles family.
Okay, thank you. I'm just anticipating that when this has been all private up until now. There's been no discussion with the public about this. So when I thought that, I just want to be sure that we have a tight answer for the public when they ask us about this. And I'll be asking staff the same question about what value the county is getting from this as well. So thank you, Ms. Beckman.
Thank you, Commissioner Thomas. Commissioner Teal?
I don't know. We've gone through this quite a bit up before today, so I'm not sure. I know we had some refinements that were presented by staff and also by the Sterling Ranch folks that kind of refined a lot of the information we've been hearing for several months before this opportunity came to the board. So I think those final clarifications that came across were pretty clear to me. I'm not sure I have any questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Teal. And I'd have to agree with that. I'd say the bulk of this year we've been having active work sessions and conversations about this potential land transfer. And frankly, the board brought forth a lot of concerns and considerations that I'm really pleased that Sterling Ranch has addressed. Again, I think about the legacy of this board and of the county, and there are partners in the community that have developed communities that are truly remarkable. And Sterling Ranch, I think, is a perfect representative of an exceptional community in the Northwest Corridor that have earned my trust to continue partnering in a way that makes sense, especially when it comes to a conservation easement that you are maintaining. We have all these resources that the citizens have approved, yet Sterling Ranch is agreeing to preserve it. And what I know of you all, especially of Harold and Diane, is a commitment to Colorado. They're Coloradans like I am. So I really appreciate that partnership, and I guess I don't have any additional concerns. This is something we've been talking about for most of this year.
And I agree, we've been talking about it, but it's all been executive session. So this is really the first time that the public has had the opportunity to understand and know about this. And that's why I'm asking these questions, so that the public has the opportunity to know that we've had these conversations, but they have been in executive session. So now this is in the public view.
Absolutely, and transparency is one of our top priorities in the county. If there's no further discussion among the board, I'll open it up for any citizen comment. Is there any citizen comment either in hello, welcome.
Thank you. My name's Katie Barrett, and I'm a Castle Rock resident. I just want to know if the conservation easement will be open to the public in terms of trails or paths along those lines. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barrett. Any additional citizen comment? Troy, do we have any citizen comment online?
Thank you, Commissioner. I have no online comment.
Okay, thank you. So with that, I'll close citizen comment and ask the applicant or staff if they want to respond to the citizen comment. I see Mr. Smethels. Welcome.
I believe that the property in in discussion with staff, could be open to the public depending on the direction of the conservation easement that staff wants it to go, but it is a possibility.
Okay, thank you for that. Any staff commentary on that?
Commissioner Dan Dirts for staff. I'd say at this time the purpose of the conservation easement will serve that wildlife movement corridor, and that's what the intended use of it is at this time. I believe within the conservation easement there are some options down the line as we consider those things, but I believe at this time the intended use is for the wildlife movement corridor and the community separation buffer.
Okay.
Chris Pratt, staff.
Yep.
Chris Pratt, staff.
Chris Pratt with staff. Just to add to that, there are some unique challenges to this site, which is part of the reason why it's a somewhat complex land transfer agreement. But the conservation easement itself, the language, will be determined within a year of the closing, and that will be the point at which we'll negotiate what exactly we would want on the site or not, whether we want flexibility to allow the public to use it. As I said, there are some unique challenges on site that we may not want to make it open to the public. It will depend entirely on how we phrase that conservation easement, and that document has not yet been made.
So while Chris is still there, if I could just ask this question. So the presentation that we had today and that we've had ongoing for months is that there are those three options that the county will decide on based on the research we do would be best to put in the public works building. Is that right? And so within a year, maybe we'll know if we're doing option 1, 2, or 3, or what will that look like?
There are several timelines built into this agreement. It's a cascading series of options. So option 1 is our choice unless there's something wrong with option 1. We have 6 months to investigate the site and determine whether there's an issue. After 6 months, Sterling Ranch will have up to 120 days to determine whether they can try to mitigate whatever is causing the problem on the site. And then if they do feel they can mitigate it, they'll have up to a year to try and mitigate it. If they cannot, or if they choose not to at any point, then we will switch to option 2. Option 2 will have the exact same timeline. And so it is possible that it may be some time before we actually start using a site, but I believe staff, Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe staff was comfortable with we do not have an imminent need to build on the site. We just need one reserved for the future, and so these timelines were acceptable to staff.
Thank you, Mr. Pratt.
Thank you, Commissioner Thomas. Thank you, Mr. Pratt. Any additional questions or comments from the board?
I'd like to just take a quick second and address Ms. Barrett's question. Katie, the prior director before Mr. Dirts, when this was first brought up, she was actually still here. She hadn't retired yet. She was very clear and very verbose to limit pedestrian access in the wildlife corridor. Now, her reasons were it's designated wildlife corridor. Do we have an idea when the elk will use it in order to migrate, which they do? Everybody from Colorado who knows elk knows that happens. But the issue is, we're not planning on doing anything with the good people of the Beers. They still get to live there. They still get to have loud children playing in backyards. They still get to play loud music occasionally, which is a constraint and a funneling effect to the elk herds to begin with. And then, there's still use planned on the parcels reserved for the county. So from that perspective, she was very verbose to limit pedestrian access, limit residential use, and really make that just wildlife habitat. The lay of the land, Commissioner Thomas and I, early in this process, we actually had an opportunity to go out onto the land. It's very rolling. And so it would, in my opinion, I would still like us to have some kind of public access to that area, because I think the land naturally limits exposure. There could be a grove of trees, there could be a small hill, and on that other side could be 100 elk, and you'd never know it. Now, on the other hand, for all of those of us who have lived in Colorado, who may have had the opportunity to walk up unexpectedly on a herd of elk before, that too can be a very adventurous moment for said pedestrian going through the area. So those are some of the things we're looking at. I think the Assistant County Attorney did a really great job talking about how we're still going to go through that development plan. Personally, I think there's a way through it, but we've decided that's not a consideration before the board today. We're probably going to have an opportunity to talk about that more in the future.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Teal. So we've had citizen comment. I'll bring it back to the board for any further discussion and or a motion.
I'd like to weigh in, and I'd like to share something. You know, we're obviously, colleagues, we're all collected from, 3 different parts of the county. And I'd like to share something with you from my time on the Castle Rock Council. And it was a development discussion. And a resident of Castle Rock, just like Ms. Barrett and I, came forward and said, gave us the cautionary, put a parking lot in Paradise, bought Paradise and put up a parking lot. And the cautionary note of Castle Rock, can we stop, putting parking lots everywhere? Do we have to build on every single square inch? Can't there be places that he could drive across Castle Rock and still see cows, still see horses grazing? And that really affected me because that's the thing I've always valued about the town of Castle Rock. And I know folks drive into Castle Rock, they drive up and down Wilcox, they go out to the outlet mall, and they think, well, Castle Rock doesn't think that way at all. But we do, and that was part of our planning in Castle Rock. What I really like about this plan is the fact that we're taking one of our oldest residential neighborhoods in the entire county, and that's the town of Leviers, which you got to remember was originally not called Leviers. It was called Louviers because it was built as a factory town for the DuPont company. And it's taking Leviers. Those folks can still live there. They can still enjoy that area. It is taking the new residential development of Sterling Ranch, which we already know has 3,000 people-ish living in it. They love it. They enjoy it. And we're building that buffer of green space. We're building that preserved area between those two residential areas here in the county. So for me, I've liked this plan from the start. Obviously, there was a lot of devil and a lot of details that we had to go through. But I've really enjoyed this because it's taking a spot that used to be an industrial area, by the way, and it's preserving it, and it's building that place where, there's going to be grass, there's going to be trees, and there's going to be elk walking through there. There's going to be deer and wildlife, and it's preserving it into perpetuity while still letting us do the things that we need to do for civilization. So I'm very much in favor of this project. It was a lot of back and forth. Thank you to the folks, the Smethel family, and your employees for having patience with the board. Thank you for our staff for taking on such a big, big lift. A lot of details to go through, but if it does please the board, I do have a motion to approve the Chemours property contract to exchange real property and post-closing occupancy agreement.
Second.
So we have a first and second on the floor. Any further discussion? I agree. And from the outset, I think, this to Chris's point, this is a challenged parcel with limited options for the county. And I think through partnership, we've identified a way to maintain green space, have a wildlife corridor, and anticipate a future for commercial redevelopment that's appropriate northwest of this particular site. So, maybe just one last question for Dan is, in the alternative, if we were not to do this, what would happen with this property?
I will add one point of clarification and address your remark. In seeking a recommendation, thank you. In seeking a recommendation, one clarification, staff is seeking a recommendation of approval of the contract subject to final review of the associated legal descriptions. The legal descriptions have a number of calls, bearings, and distances that require tracing, and staff is working on that now. Were this agreement not entered into at this time, Sterling Ranch Acquisitions holds an option on the land. They could certainly proceed with their acquisition and seek land use entitlements for not just the area shown in yellow here, but the entirety of the property. And that would come before the board through future land use actions.
Okay, great. Yeah, I don't have any further questions or consideration. Anything else for Board of County Commissioners? Seeing none, all those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, and that carries 3-0. Congratulations. Please.
Would you mind if we went back and heard item P? It was pulled by error, so we do need to approve that.
Yes, we can hear item P. So item P is...
And I don't know that we need to hear it. I think we just need to approve it as a consent agenda item.
Okay, and that item for the benefit of the public is the acceptance of grant of easement from Cherry Hills Community Church to accommodate traffic signal facility improvements at the Fairview Parkway, Grace Boulevard intersection, Douglas County project number TF 2021-029.
So when our motion log was created this afternoon, it was done with an error in it. P should have been removed, so we should have approved the consent agenda A through AD without removing P.
So P should have been included in the consent agenda, correct?
That's correct. There's a clerical error.
Okay. Would you like to make a corrective motion?
I would be happy to just make a motion as a consent item to approve item P as part of a consent agenda.
Point of order. We've already decided the consent agenda. I think the motion must reflect that we would want to that we would want to consider the acceptance of the grant agreement from Cherry Hills Community Church to accommodate traffic signal facility improvements at the Fairview Parkway Grace Boulevard intersection, and cited as Douglas County project number TF 2021-029, which I think would be the appropriate motion to make, which I don't have an objection to considering that motion.
Well, I'm pleased that Commissioner Thomas brought this forward, and I always appreciate that you've looked closely at the agenda and made sure that our motion law reflects the actions of the board. The motion that was made was to approve the requests in all items A through AD of the consent agenda, and that has been approved. What was incorrect in that motion is that item P has been pulled from the agenda, and it has not. So I'll ask the county attorney, I'm pleased to make a record of the fact that item P was not pulled from the agenda, or would you like a new motion?
We can do it either way. We can either do a motion to amend the prior approval, or we can do a separate motion on item P. So I would ask for a separate motion on item P. I think it's cleanest.
Okay, well, I'll accept the county attorney's recommendation and accept the motion in that regard.
And I'll repeat the motion I made just to approve item P that appears on the consent agenda in our agenda.
Okay, and we do have that motion on the floor. Do we have a second?
Second.
So there's a first and second on the floor. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, and that motion carries. Thank you for that. So we will move on to item 4, which is citizen comment organization comments. At this time, you are welcome to comment about any topic other than what is scheduled on today's regular agenda. You will be prompted to comment on those items at the appropriate time, and this is an opportunity to share your thoughts and ideas with us. If you would, when commenting, please state your name and where you reside. You will have up to 3 minutes to make your comment, and then commissioner comments, if any, will follow all citizen comments. With that, do we have any citizen comment in the room? Any citizen comment? Ms. Barrett?
I thought all those gentlemen were going to come in and comment, so. Mr. Teal, thank you for agreeing with me on several things. I do appreciate that. But today, I couldn't decide whether to comment on Pride Fest's invasion by the Christians or the actions by Mr. Teal regarding the Water Commission and his obvious goal of taking water from the San Luis Valley with his friends. I chose Pride Fest because Mr. Teal attempted to quash this family-friendly event. Also, I can't ignore the actions of Mr. Teal's friend, Jimmy Graham, and his white-shirted Able Shepherd stormtroopers. Able Shepherd does not have the right nor moral morality to judge and interfere in families different from their own. In our beloved America, all people are guaranteed equal protection. Singling out our LGBT plus community is as unlawful as carving out people based on race, color, or creed. I personally don't agree with raising fearful and sheltered children who will live in the world. However, I have no right to protest that upbringing. Consider when you're in a group, Mr. Teal, that 7 to 10% of the attendees have a sexual orientation that doesn't conform to your limited view. And please stop saying sexual orientation is encouraged by teachers and mental health professionals. Varying sexual orientation has a basis in science. These caring adults are trying to keep young people alive. People like you are hurting young people by shaming and causing fear. I digress. The white shirts proclaim to be the protectors of children. How can they justify actions that frightened families and caused children to cry? I would support a brief protest, as is their right, but 40 minutes of terror and disrespect to attendees was beyond the pale. I applaud Sheriff Weekly for severing ties with Able Shepherd. I hope he continues this honorable stance. We'll be watching. I should also address Graham's laughable podcast when he said his people were intimidated at Pride Fest. The self-proclaimed examples of suitable masculinity have feet of clay. Neil Postman, educator and social critic, posited that children are living messages we send to a time we will not see. Let's send them to the future with the message of kindness and inclusion for all walks of life. After all, I believe this is one of Jesus' tenets. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barrett. Any additional citizen comment? Okay, seeing none in the room, any citizen comment online?
I have no online comment.
Okay, thank you, Troy. And with that, I'll close citizen comment and bring it back to the board for any commissioner comment. Any commissioner comment?
I have none, thank you.
No, I mean, other than there should always be a forum where the residents of this county should feel free to come in and express their views and share their mind with their neighbors.
Absolutely. And I will, we have reordered our agenda somewhat in recent months, and so we have commissioner comment sometimes twice. So I'll just bring item 7 back up and ask if there are any final commissioner comments with regard to this hearing today.
I have no further comments. I appreciate it.
Okay, I have none either. I guess I will address Ms. Barrett's comment, and I do appreciate you coming here. I think that it was actually a tremendous success of Pride Fest, our citizens, law enforcement, to have freedom of speech and to express views that are somewhat controversial, but it's so important to recognize. And what I saw firsthand at that event is citizens from different backgrounds all coming together to want to protect and support young people. I will say I do take issue with those that choose to protest a G-rated performance. When I do think about protecting kids, we're running a bill right now in Douglas County around human trafficking. We have more human trafficking sites in the Front Range of Denver than there are Starbucks. If there's really a desire to protect kids, I hope that those that protested and others will join us in fighting human trafficking, which is an actual serious and grave concern for young people. With that, I'll move on to any other business. Does the board have any other business it would like to entertain today? Okay. For the county manager, anything from the county manager? Okay, and his amazing county manager report is included as an attachment. And we've done commissioner comments. So the next business meeting will be held on Tuesday, October 10th, 2023 at 1:30 p.m. I will adjourn for about 5 minutes for our staff to reset, and then we'll begin our land use hearing. Thank you.